Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Mean Streets, powered by FT and right here on Game Plus Network. Chris Meaney here with you. Always appreciate you guys hanging out with me here today. We have some MLB props and some MLB picks towards the end of the show. We're going to touch on all the big four here. I know there's no NBA, no NHL happening here tonight, not for a while, but we're oh so close to free agency in both of those sports. Of course, the NBA draft already took place. You got the NHL draft happening July 7th and NHL free agency happening on July 13th. So we're just going to roll through some of the top free agents available a little bit later on in the show. Actually, like in the next couple blocks. We'll save the MLB picks for a little bit later on, but we'll roll through some of the top NBA free agents. Of course, James Harden is up at the top, but he does have a player option. We heard from Kyrie Irving yesterday in the news, John Wall in the news yesterday, and just before we came on here, of course, Russell Westbrook decided to opt in to his final year with the Los Angeles Lakers. There were some reports, that there could be a trade between the Lakers and the Nets. Kyrie Irving, what the heck does this guy want? It sounds like he wants to come back for another year with the Brooklyn Nets. So we'll touch on all of that and a little bit later on. We have the fantasy football target of the day. Yesterday we talked about Najee Harris, and I touched base a little bit of just my strategy. I want to stockpile stud wide receivers in the first few rounds. And I know I gave you guys Najee Harris yesterday. I think if you want to go the running back route, that would be the way to go. I believe Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey are okay. I think they're just fine if you have one of those top two picks. I would go Taylor 1, then I'd go Cup before everybody else. I'm a little hesitant to draft Dalvin Cook. I know that he's a stud when he plays. I just think I'd rather a wide receiver in around that range. Derrick Henry is not somebody really for me, so I do like Harris in there and all the touches and the opportunities that he had last year. The offensive line did okay. It kind of, held up a little bit. Some improvement certainly for the Steelers. Maybe better quarterback play, right? Whether it's Trubisky or Pickett, it doesn't matter. It's probably better than Big Ben, what they gave him last year. So Najee Harris, a strong target. I'm going to talk about another running back, but I will roll through round 2 of NFFC leagues, high stakes leagues. You got the ADP of all the players getting drafted in the second round. I'll dive into that a little bit later on, and we will continue our NFL team previews. Today, we will wrap up the AFC West, and we'll talk a little bit about the New York Jets. Mark Carr in the house. Please tell me Cuss will be a special guest for the Jets preview. I was thinking about Cuss. I should probably get him on. Maybe I'll just give some reasonable takes on the Jets first, and then maybe we can bring in Cuss and he can talk them all up. It's prediction up to 19 games won yet. Yes, he is a big Jets fan, and I'm sure he's feeling the Jets. And you know what? You should kind of feel a little bit better about the New York Jets. They've made some great picks over the past couple years. I thought they had a really strong draft. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall. These are all really solid additions to their squad. Last year, Elijah Moore and, Michael Carter, who's going to take a step back, but, I think he did a pretty good back. I think a pretty good 1-2 punch. They bolstered the offensive line in each of the past couple of seasons as well. I don't think, we can be too hard on Zach Wilson from last year, but they're not a playoff team, let's be honest. It's like a 4-win team. I see their odds at their win total at 5.5, 6.5 plus money. It's kind of all over the place, but I do think that they're a better team, but ultimately they're still, a long ways to go, especially inside the AFC West. But I'm looking for Zach Wilson. I want to see Zach Wilson, take some strides forward. I think there was some unfair comparisons with Zach Wilson making throws that are similar to Patrick Mahomes. And I guess when you watch the film in college, you do see some of that, sidearm, lean back, on the run. There's been some of those throws, but we didn't see really any of them in the NFL last year, but he did suffer an injury. So we'll touch base on the Jets a little bit later on the show. There's not a whole lot really to talk about from a fantasy perspective, but I do like some of their weapons. I think Breece Hall I think he's going to be a fine running back in the league. And I like Moore. I think he's a really good wide receiver. No Jamison Crowder. He's got the slot locked in there. Corey Davis still in the squad. Jets preview. Done. Over. That's it. We'll dive into them a little bit later on. Yesterday, we talked about the game plan, courtesy of Jeff Ratcliffe. It is absolutely live and it is fantastic. 300 player profiles, cheat sheet, auction values, top rookies, advanced stats, rankings for all the major fantasy football formats, talking standard, half point, full point, PPR, super flex. Also $84.99 over at ftnfantasy.com/pricing. You can use the promo code Meaney, save yourself 20%. It includes all of Jeff's content, myself on there, rankings. You got Nelson Souza, one of the best high stakes players in the game. We have a lot of content already at ftnfantasy.com. Breakouts, risers, fallers, players that changed jerseys this year. What does it mean? Projections. You got all the tools, 40 plus tools available to you as well, and just to help you get set up for your fantasy football drafts. And of course, we'll be with you throughout the entire season. Jeff was the #1 ranker last year over at Fantasy Pros, and we will have weekly rankings for you. We'll have projections, and man, we're starting sit tools to help you out. Discord channel as well. Jeff's got his own channel over there where you can just ask him any question you want at all times, and he is right there available for you as well. We'll be doing something pretty cool here after July 4th. We will, I think it's, it may even be before July 4th. I think maybe starting next week. I'll get back to you on that. But it's in a couple days. We're all taking like at least an hour a day to sit and just chat fantasy football with you guys. So all the subs that are already locked in with us, you have any keeper questions, dynasty questions, any kind of football questions at all. I think I have a session this Sunday actually for about an hour, Sunday or Saturday. Again, I'll get back to you. I mean, my days are mixed up. A lot going on right now in the sports world. Always excuses for me. But I do believe I'm with somebody, with you guys over the weekend, and we're going to rotate through everybody that we have at FTN. So just an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you want. We'll be with you like 24/7 throughout the season. And at any moment, you can tag any of us in the Discord channel. We are there. And the conversations are great. We have high-stake conversations, a Keeper League, Dynasty League, all kinds of great conversations happening in our Discord channel across all of the sports. I just had somebody reached out yesterday and signed up over at ftnbets.com, and I think they were pretty happy with yesterday, how things worked. Josh Gross is killing it, of course, in tennis. I think he won like 8 units yesterday. Wimbledon happening. And then, MLB was okay on this show yesterday. We didn't get Lucas Giolito with the strikeouts. We needed one more. That was kind of frustrating, but we talked about Tristan McKenzie and that fly ball percentage and giving up bombs. He gave up a bunch of bombs yesterday. We had Carlos Correa for a home run on the show yesterday and over 1.5 total bases. We got it with one swing. Luis Arraez had a run scored. We had that as well. And then we had Tim Anderson for a stolen base against Noah Syndergaard. He had 2 stolen bases, but we had 0.5 units on that in the FTN bet tracker at plus 750. Syndergaard continues to just, they were trying different things yesterday in the game against the White Sox. Pitching out just quicker to the mound. It's just not working for him. I think what we said on the show, if Anderson had a single, he was going to steal second. And that's exactly what happened. Then he stole a third right away, too. And there was just no answer. They had no answer. So anytime, just keep that in the back of your mind when Syndergaard goes up against a team, when there's some speedy guys on the opposite side. Most likely, if one of those guys are going to get on base, they are going to steal a bag. And he has allowed the most stolen bases this season and the most out of all active pitchers, I do believe, in the bigs. A shout out to a couple people. We are still doing the giveaway with the game plan. I want to give this package away. I want to show it off to you guys. So if you're on the fence about fantasy football, if you just don't have a draft guide yet that you're into, you're thinking about maybe playing some fantasy football, we are going to give you not only Jeff Ratcliffe's game plan, but the Platinum package, which includes absolutely everything that FTNFantasy.com offers. And all we're asking is your favorite fantasy football target in the chat section here. Or if you're watching the show on Game Plus Network, you can hop on over to our FTN Network YouTube page, subscribe, maybe smash the like button on this video. I love the support that everybody is showing me. And also just leave your favorite fantasy football target. We had a couple yesterday, and I'll be honest, there's only 3. So you got a pretty good chance of winning this package. If you listen on iTunes and Spotify, just hop on over for a second, make a YouTube account. It'll take you literally just a couple minutes. You subscribe to this show and then leave your comment there in the YouTube section. And if maybe YouTube is not your thing, meanstreetsftn@gmail.com. You can email me your favorite fantasy football target, and I will put you in that draw anyways. But as of right now, we had Forby, I think it was Forby81 left MVS as his favorite fantasy football target. This is nice. It's not a complete stud. We got somebody moving from Green Bay to Kansas City, a big A-dot guy, and going to catch balls from Patrick Mahomes. No Tyreek Hill there. You got Alvin Kamara from Mike Fields. I followed up and said, interesting. Alvin Kamara, is it because of the discount? Potentially suspended for 6 6 games, and he did say the discount, and when he's back and active, he is a lock and loaded RB1, which he liked. And then Meaney, it was in there with Rashad Bateman, which I think is a really good target as well. I think there's a career 100 grabs out of the wide receiver room for Baltimore. Mark Andrews is clearly the number one guy, but Rashad Bateman heading into year 2. Devin Duvernay leads all wide receivers in career catches on that squad with like 56. So Rashad Bateman through the roof now that Marquise Brown is no longer there and a member of the Arizona Cardinals. So leave your favorite fantasy target, Mark Carr, leave it there. Daily Handle in the house, leave it there as well. FTN is very worth being a part of. Sign up. I have been making a profit from all the expert bets. Great conversations as always, too. Appreciate that. I do see you live in the chat, MLB chat. NHL is over now, but I know you're a huge sports fan. We got some college stuff happening as well. So I do appreciate those kind words. 10 minutes in, we will break, and we'll just roll through the NBA free agents that are available and the NHL free agents, and then we'll get into some MLB picks and the New York Jets, as well as a favorite fantasy football target of mine from round 2 of drafts. Keep your locks. Lots to get to. Welcome back in. I see some comments from some people. I forgot to bring up Matty Wolf, George. Matty Wolf, Live Tour. Awesome. We can't make a cut on the PGA Tour, so no cuts over at the Live Tour. Maybe you'll be able to win a tournament over there. Shots fired. I mean, these guys are trickling through. I still think that the PGA Tour is in a good place. They still have the studs that I care about, and I think the best players in the world still golfing there. As long as Rory and JT and Morikawa, who shot down all those rumors, John Rahm, like these guys are still hanging out there. So have fun, Matty Wolf. I'm glad we don't have to talk about Matty Wolf anymore. I mean, there's just too many times we talk about Matty Wolf and like long shots to win tournaments on this show, and it just doesn't seem to happen. Mark Card's got a target in there too. This is a good one. I like to target ETN as well. He's going just outside the second round. I'm sure you know, Mark, but for those that just want a sneak peek of where Travis Etienne is going in drafts, and he has yet to play a snap in the NFL. Of course, he suffered that injury before last season. He is going as pick 47 on average, min 25 over at NFFC leagues. This is the last month, just the last 4 weeks, high stakes leagues. Drafts are really starting to ramp up, but people are putting their money on the line. So a min pick of 25 and a max of 73. A min pick of 25 is very telling. People are willing to take him at the end of the second, early third. You got the reverse, how things will draft, the reverse order there. Boom, first, second, boom, reverse back. So ETN roughly RB 22, 23, 24, and around that range. I think he's a pretty good target too. James Robinson's not expected to be ready to start the season. Doug Peterson did say something about him being, the workhorse guy when he is there. But man, let's see what ETN has, right? You can move him all over the field. Clearly very familiar with Trevor Lawrence. Both of those guys played together at Clemson. So I'm excited about him too. I think, he does have Kamara abilities to him, right? He's explosive after the catch. He can carry the rock, run between the tackles. Yeah, I'm excited about him, and I think the Jags will be much better. Just getting Urban Meyer away from that squad, they can't be worse. A couple NBA news items here. So yesterday, I do believe we brought up Kyrie Irving, but according to Woj, Kyrie and Kyrie himself had tweeted like, "See you next year." Kyrie Irving plans to exercise his $36 million player option with the Nets. So it is good news for the Brooklyn Nets. They're, like I said in the last block, there's just been some talk that, is there a deal between the Lakers? And, I'm assuming that the Lakers just had nothing to offer the Nets besides Russell Westbrook. And as fun as it would be to see Kyrie and LeBron back together and Russ and KD back together, it's just not going to happen. So before we came on here, Woj just tweeted again as well that Russell Westbrook is planning to exercise his $47.1 million option to return to the Lakers. And why wouldn't he, right? Because it was a brutal season from Russell Westbrook, right? One of his worst. Russell Westbrook, they were calling him. Not great, right? Not a great campaign. Of course, he's going to opt in. And then there was another report from Woj late last night that John Wall, once he clears waivers, is planning to sign with the Los Angeles Clippers. What do we think about this? Daily Handle's in the house. He says he's a diehard sports fan. Last week when we talked about the NBA championship odds with Zach Graham, a.k.a. Quasenberg DFS, actually, I don't know if we brought it up with him, but I did bring it up on the show, was the Clippers at like 7-1. I thought it was a bit of a sucker bet, but ultimately, like, Wall kind of fits into, with Paul George, who has dealt with some injuries, and then Kawhi Leonard's dealt with some injuries. He kind of fits in. It's like, I think a team that would be really good in NBA 2K, like turn the injury setting off and just roll with the Clippers. I mean, their depth chart could look like Wall, Jackson, Powell, Kennard. You got Paul George and Covington. I really like Covington as a player. I think he's a really good defender. Kawhi in there. Do they bring back Batum for another year? Who else is on there? That's basically it, right? Morris, Marcus Morris on the squad there, but not a bad little 1-2 punch with Reggie Jackson and Wall. I think it's okay. I think it'd be all right. 7-1 is a little rich, but if John Wall's there and he can give them a little bit something, he's not going to be the John Wall of old. I think it could be. All right. Here's a list of the available NBA free agents, and you'll see here on the list, like, some of these players have a player option. James Harden, I expect him to opt in, and maybe they work out a bit of a deal, an extension there in Philadelphia. Miles Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, and Colin Sexton as well as Simmons, all restricted free agents. But it does sound like DeAndre Ayton is out the door. I think it's a sign and trade. Other teams can offer him that extra year. There's been some reports Detroit potentially one of those teams that wants to make a splash here in the offseason. I don't think that the Suns want to ante up with Ayton. I don't think they want to spend that kind of dough on him. There's reports last year that they didn't want to spend that kind of dough on him. And there's. How good is Ayton? I think he's good. I think part of the success that he's had over the past couple of years has a lot to do with Chris Paul, certainly, and Devin Booker. Creates a lot of open space for him, and Chris Paul is one of the better floor generals in the game, even at his age. So Ayton, I think, is certainly on the move. Bradley Beal, he could be, man, he is a really interesting target. Whether he re-ups with Washington or not, he is certainly going to get paid. I think Zach LaVine is a guy that's going to leave Chicago. Jalen Brunson, I do believe the writing is on the wall. His dad is now an assistant coach for the New York Knicks, and ultimately, I mean, the Mavs want to bring him back, but they'd be over the luxury if they do decide to bring him back. I think he's gone. I think he's going to be a starting point guard for the New York Knicks. Otto Porter Jr. in there, Kyle Anderson, Mitchell Robertson. Yusef Nurkic, I think, is an interesting player. I do believe Portland will bring him back. I think he's just like a veteran, and they don't really have anything else there on the squad, so I think they'll have to bring him back. Portland's a weird squad, right? What are they doing? Are they all in? Are they rebuilding? they got to figure out to build some pieces around Dame, or like it's Dame time will no longer be around in Portland, no longer be there. So not a lot of big marquee names really. There's not going to be a lot of different super teams that are built here throughout the offseason, but we'll keep an eye on all of that. Kyrie was the biggest one, and who knows? You just never know what is going on with Kyrie. But according to him, he is back. And for the player options, those guys have till Wednesday, tomorrow, to kind of make that decision on what they want to do. But, James Harden took a bit of a step back last year, 22 points per game. 7 rebounds, 10 assists, like distributing the rock a little bit. But I just felt like he was very underwhelming in the playoffs. It wasn't he wasn't as aggressive. And just a couple years ago, this is a guy that was jacking up like 20 plus shots, but even in games without Embiid in the playoffs, he was just very mediocre and very passive. You got Philly. It's your guy. You got him. I think he's just going to be a 76er the rest of the way. Let's break and highlight a couple NHL free agent options out there for teams. There's much bigger names in the NHL. So we'll break and we'll dive into that here on Mean Streets. Welcome back in. Yeah, Mark, we got to give credit to George for that, right? We were just going to put like a little news item, and then he came up with that graphic in a couple seconds, and I was chuckling as well. Kyrie still got it, man. He's still a good player. I do believe we're going to see a different Kyrie. I think he's going to be motivated this year, but you just never know, right? He is a wild card. Talking about Earth being flat, not like he's just like on the NBA court. He can still bring it, and I'm sure Nets fans are happy about him sticking around. Okay, so NHL free agency, not going to dive into this too much, just kind of show you guys who's available. I recorded Dangle Bet Sally this morning with Eric Young. It is live on our FTN Network YouTube page. We got one more episode happening this week on Thursday. We'll dive into like way too early fantasy hockey rankings, and then we'll say goodbye until the closer to puck drop. But Dangle Bet Sally, available, iTunes, Spotify, and then on Game Plus Network here at 5 Eastern. We really dove into it. We looked at the Stanley Cup futures, which we talked about yesterday, and then we just dove into all the available free agents. So let's start. Tyler, I don't know what order you have here, but Philip Forsberg and Johnny Hockey, like Johnny Gaudreau, those are the guys that are like marquee. Okay, we'll start here with defensemen. This is all good. Chris Letang and John Klingberg. You got PK Subban there. PK Subban, man, he's really just fallen off over the past couple of seasons. You remember he signed that massive deal with the Canadiens, $9 million, and then he was shipped to Nashville straight up for Shea Weber, and then the Predators shipped him to the Devils for basically nothing just to kind of get him off the books. I do believe he has something to offer as like maybe a top 4 defenseman, and maybe a change of scenery, but man, not a lot from a real life standpoint or a fantasy hockey standpoint over the past couple of seasons. Really didn't get a whole lot of top power play time in New Jersey over the past couple of years either, but the two guys up at the top are the guys, right? Chris Letang had a career year. I still think he has a couple years left to offer, like elite seasons. 34-year-old John Klingberg, they weren't able to really sign an extension, come to an agreement between him and Dallas. He wanted Miro Heiskanen money, and it's just not available to him there. Dallas got some bad contracts, like Alexander Radulov, Sagan, and Ben. These guys making a little bit more than they probably should. I think Klingberg would be a good get for a lot of teams. Josh Manson, I thought, was fantastic in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Ben Chiarot, Edler, Leddy, and Zadorov. Clearly, there's not a lot of big names here for defensemen. We'll see where Subban goes. Like, he's definitely gonna get a massive pay cut. But I think maybe if he's signed somewhere there for $1 million or $2 million a year, he could, if he decides to go that route, then he can maybe land himself on a competitive team. Let's switch over. What else do you have for us, Tyler? Continue to roll through. So some goalies here. There's not a lot of just like game changers. Marc-Andre Fleury is one near the end of his career. Does he want to take a pay cut and land with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Does he go back to? I don't think he goes back to Pittsburgh. They got Tristan Jarry there, but. There are some teams that certainly need some goalies. Edmonton is one of them. Does R.C. Kemper stay with Colorado? Do they want him there in Colorado? They got some guys to sign, as you see when we roll through some of these other slides. There's still some big names and key contributors to their Stanley Cup that need new contracts. Jack Campbell in Toronto, does he stay? They probably want a goalie at sub $4 million. Campbell maybe asking for $4.5, $5 million. Maybe that's too rich for Toronto. They're right up against it. Billy Husso had a really strong campaign for St. Louis, but we haven't seen really anything apart from this season. Jordan Binnington is locked up there, $6 million plus, so they can't afford to bring him in. He's a guy that could maybe go to the Devils. He could go to, I don't know, maybe Toronto. Maybe he's in play for the Leafs, the Devils, the Oilers. I feel like teams should be maybe a little hesitant on locking him up. I think he's a decent goalie. We just saw him cool off down the stretch into the playoffs. He had an opportunity to steal the net, and he didn't really do it all that successfully. And who knows? He's maybe not a guy that can, 60 plus games. Maybe just the 1 year that we've seen was maybe some fatigue, and maybe he can get into, 60 plus on his year-to-year resume, but I just don't see it. And then the other guys there are just backups. I put Koskinen on the list just to remind people that the Edmonton Oilers really do need a goalie because Mike Smith is now on the other side of 40. And then continue to roll through some of these here. So this is the list here of some really marquee forwards that are available potentially. Again, teams have till July 13th to lock these guys up. Johnny Gaudreau, fantastic season. Career highs across the board, over 100 points. Philip Forsberg, career high 42 goals. I think 84 points, career highs across the board for him as well. Nazem Kadri, another career season. It's very fitting that some of these guys that, were in contract years had bet their best years of their NHL career. Sometimes it just works that way. There's extra motivation on the other side, of course, for some of these players. They're fighting for their next contract to put food on the tables for their families. Those three guys up at the top are all really, really good players and had really, really good campaigns. Evgeny Malkin, Claude Giroux, Valeri Nichushkin, David Perron, Evander Kane, Andre Palat, and Andrew Kopp in there. Nichushkin's contract is probably going to look like $6 million. I think he could stay with the Avs. They do have a little bit of cap space, but they got to sign Arturi Lehkonen, who's an RFA, who had a really good playoff for them, had the game-winning goal and the Stanley Cup clinching goal in Game 6, and then also the overtime winner against the Oilers to punch the ticket into the Stanley Cup Finals, and he was really good for them. Played top power play throughout the playoffs, especially when Kadri wasn't there. He was playing on the top line at times, and in Game 6, the clinching game, he was on that top line with Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen. He's just a really smart player. So what does his contract look like? $3-4 million. I think he deserves $4 million after that campaign. And then you have Andre Burakovsky as well, who is an RFA or a UFA. So on that list, if you want to bring it up one more time, I think Gaudreau, Forsberg stay. I think Kadri is willing to take a bit of a pay cut. Now, he's been one of the most underrated players in the league in terms of his contract. The Leafs, it was a really friendly deal for the Leafs, and that's kind of why they had to ship him off because there was good return, although the trade wasn't great in hindsight. But Kadri is a guy that could get $9+ million. Like if he I don't know. Does he settle in Colorado? Like, this is a good spot for him. You know, he won a cup, got a great core there. It can make another run. Or does he take that $9+ million from a team? He's going to get lots of offers from teams that can get $9+ million. I don't know about Malkin. He's, you know, been battling injuries over the past couple years. I do believe Malkin, or I think they have to make a decision in Pittsburgh. Is it Malkin or Letang? I think they keep Letang, so it'll be interesting. It'd be really weird to see Malkin another uni. I think Nichushkin sticks. Giroux, I don't know what to think about Giroux. He's still got a lot to offer. He had a really good season with the Flyers. David Perron, I think, you know, he's going to have to take a pay cut if he wants to stay in St. Louis. And Evander Kane is absolutely a wild card. And then we have one more slide here. I think, you know, the Oilers would like to bring back Evander Kane, but he was so good with Edmonton. I think there would be a team or two that would be willing to give him 5+, and the Oilers just can't do that. Ryan Strome could be out the door. You know, you got the kids and that they made a step forward in Hedl and Lafreniere last year. So maybe, you know, you see a larger role for them as like a second line center. I think Vincent Trocheck's out the door. Jesperi Kotkaniemi was a guy Carolina went after and then extended him. I don't think he's ready for a second line role, to be honest with you, but I don't think they bring back Trocheck or Nito Niederreiter. Carolina could look a bit different. Man, if they got Nazem Kadri, I think that'd be a good get. Mason Marchment was basically a point per game guy last year with the Panthers and not playing on the top line with Barkov and Huberdeau and not really getting any power play time. Only had 2 power play points last season. I think he's a very underrated player, a former Leaf, and I think could be a sneaky little ad for a team that could maybe play inside the top 6, maybe second power play time. Ricard Raquel, Nicholas Paul, I think would be a really good addition. I thought he was fantastic with the Lightning in the playoffs. Max Domi, and I think Phil Kessel is just, I think he's fine in the desert, or maybe just sign a low-key contract somewhere where it's not a competitive squad, or maybe prove me wrong, Kessel. I think if he went to a competitive team, he could get $1 million and you know, give something to a team. Certainly, maybe not a top 6 player anymore, but a third line player with some speed, some experience. Maybe a guy can still score 20 goals and get some power play time in there as well. A lot of free agency talk over at Dangle Betselli if you want a deeper dive into all that, but I just want to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the players that are available come a couple weeks from now. All right, enough about that. We're going to get into some fantasy football. I got a fantasy football target for you. We're going to dive into the second round, and then we'll dive into the Jets, and we have some MLB picks as well. Daily handle. Kessel needs to... Whoa. Shots fired. Shots fired at Phil Kessel. Does he want to get in shape? Maybe he's just having fun. Desert, low key, not competitive, no media in your face all the time, right? He dealt with that in Boston. He dealt with that in Toronto. I think that's what he likes. I think he still has it. You can definitely crush a hot dog. I can crush a hot dog too. We'll break, crush some hot dogs in between the break, and we'll talk about the Jets. Keep it locked. Welcome back in. So let's take a look at just round two. Yesterday I gave you guys Najee Harris, but I did want to hammer home just a little bit more of just my strategy in the first round. So if I had the first pick, I would take Taylor. I would take Cooper Kupp second overall. And then I'd get into maybe Eckler. I like Eckler a little bit more than CMC. Those guys kind of splitting hairs. I know CMC's had a couple injuries over the past couple of years, and that's kind of why I'm a little hesitant maybe to take him. And then after CMC and Eckler, it really is the wide receiver run for me. I'd like to get Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. I would like to maybe get Davante Adams and maybe even Diggs over the rest of the guys. Najee Harris is my RB4, as I talked about yesterday. I'm not really into Derrick Henry. He's getting a little bit older, a lot of tread in the tires, had the injury last year. I just don't want to. I want to be out before like it's just a complete madness. You know what I mean? I just want to get out a year early. I still think he can be productive. I still think he's definitely one of the better backs in the league. Just not going to get too many catches from him. How's the offense going to look like without A.J. Brown? Really asking a lot for a new player in Robert Woods, is now over 30, and I've seen the videos. He looks good with Ryan Tannehill. There's chemistry. These guys are probably going out for breakfast and creating chemistry, and I'm sure he's going to be fine. But, Treylon Burks is just a rookie wide receiver. We're asking a lot for him to be productive. The team does want to run the ball in Tennessee, but I'm just out. Cook, I think I'm out too. Joe Mixon I like, and we'll get to a fade from somebody who's going inside the top 12 that I could have brought up yesterday, and I brought up Derrick Henry as a fade. But now we get into round two. These are some of the guys that are going in round two here. So, again, NFFC leagues, high-stakes leagues. Since June 1st, we got a good sample here, 27, 26 days of drafts happening, people putting their money on the line. DeAndre Swift, into him. So it went Diggs, Swift, into both. Debo, like it. Kelsey, I probably won't have too many shares of Travis Kelsey, maybe some best ball stuff, but not going to have a lot of shares. Don't want to take a tight end really that early. CeeDee Lamb, certainly into him, with Amari Cooper leaving and Gallup probably starting on the pup list and James Washington new to the offense. Dalton Schultz is brought back, and thinking of somebody else. Cedric Wilson was let go, and they drafted a guy that is Tolbert. It's completely losing my mind right now, but CeeDee Lamb I think is in for a boatload of targets. I think he's in for a good year. Last year he didn't return value. I think he can return value this year. Kamara, I'm not going to deal with it. Tyreek Hill, probably a pass for me. Mark Andrews, I like the upside, not totally into it. Nick Chubb, I think is fine. Aaron Jones, I think is fine. Josh Allen, just not going to draft a quarterback that early. I think he's going to be QB1 again this year. And then Leonard Fournette at the end of the second. I like where he's going, Leonard Fournette. I'm a fan. Last year, nobody wanted him. Sometimes Ronald Jones was drafted over Leonard Fournette. Both of these guys, there was Jones and Fournette and Giovanni Bernard, and nobody really knew what to do with them, and we just thought it would be just a bloody mess in the backfield. But look at some of the numbers. I mean, just not even a ton of attempts. Like yesterday, we talked about Najee Harris with over 300 attempts, but 180 attempts. Certainly more efficient, 4.5 yards per carry. The offensive line is good. The offense is good. Pedal to the metal, fast pace. Brady behind center, back again. 812 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. You see the receiving yards, 454, 69 receptions, and he also had 84 targets. Like, those are healthy numbers. 4.9 receptions per game and 6 targets per game. That's pretty darn good. Among running backs, 454 receiving yards was 4th in the NFL among backs. Pretty strong. Receptions was 4th among running backs as well. Actually lied, 3rd at 69. And then the targets at 6 targets per game and 84 targets overall. His 84 targets was number 3. So he was a big part of the offense. And if we can bring that board up one more time, Tyler, one of the things that the note that I didn't get to, because you see the red zone carries at 41. I mean, Taylor had like 81 or 82, but that he's going to be the goal line back there. And how about the red zone targets? You see the note there, 17 red zone targets, was 2nd in the NFL behind Austin Eckler. He is going as I mentioned, just at the end of the second round, RB12. He finished as RB6 from a fantasy point per game standpoint, full point setting. He finished as RB3. And you see the list there. I have him as a top running back. I have this guy as RB9. He's a top 10 lock and loaded running back for me. I mean, 18.3 fantasy points per game from a full point setting. Like, he could yet again finish as a top 5 running back, but nobody is drafting him as a top 5 running back. 4th in fantasy points per game in a full point setting. So if you're drafting early, you got the first couple picks, and you want to avoid one of those running backs, say you got pick 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you could go with one of those stud wide receivers and a Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, maybe Adams and Diggs, and right there as well. I think that's a tier in itself. I think for me personally, Leonard Fournette is in that tier 2. We can call tier 1 if we want, like Taylor, Eckler, CMC, but I think they're all very, very similar. And I don't think the offense is going to change in Tampa Bay. It's still going to be up-tempo, fast-paced. We have some of the tools over there, just ftnfantasy.com, pace of play, top 5 in terms of pace of play, quick, and passing percentage. This is a team that they threw the ball. Tom Brady first in passing attempts and passing yards and passing touchdowns. No Gronk, which was a red zone target for Tom Brady. So maybe, we're splitting hairs, but maybe just a couple more targets for Leonard Fournette. I think he's a lock and loaded running back. I think he's a really, really good target. And if you start your first round with wide receivers, Fournette is available to you as your RB1. Maybe you could just go Fournette, then get back involved with the wide receivers, and then revisit the running back situation, in the middle rounds. You could do something like that. I'm not saying to completely avoid running backs, but Leonard Fournette, I think, is a really, really strong target at the end of the second round. And one guy that I'm looking to fade, actually, is, and it pains me to say, is Javonte Williams. I really, really like Javonte Williams as a player. I think if there was no Melvin Gordon, I would have him ranked at RB5. I like Denver, I like the offense. Russell Wilson's there, I like the offensive line, and plus Javonte Williams is a freak. He's awesome. He's fantastic. I mean, breaking tackles left, right, and center, really good. But they brought back Melvin Gordon, and they used Melvin Gordon a lot last year. So I just think that Leonard Fournette is slightly undervalued, and I think Javonte Williams is slightly overvalued. And again, it does break my heart to say this. I think he's a top 3 running back in dynasty leagues. If you could find a way to get him off somebody's roster, by all means try it, especially with Melvin Gordon there. You're probably not going to be able to get Javonte Williams, but let's just break down both of these guys last year. And they finished as in a full point setting. It's very, very close here. I think it was RB17 and RB18. This is from a fantasy, not from a point per game standpoint, but overall. Yeah, Javonte Williams, RB17, Melvin Gordon, RB20. Javonte Williams is going as RB12, ADP 12. He's got a min of 2. So somebody out there has taken Javonte Williams second overall. His max is 26, so he's fallen to the third round of some drafts. You know where Melvin Gordon is going? Melvin Gordon is going, you have to scroll all the way down the list. Melvin Gordon is going, my goodness, I thought I had it here. ADP 108. 108. And that is in the 30s for running backs. 39. 108, min of 72, 141. I'm not saying that Melvin Gordon's going to have a better season than Javonte Williams, but I think it's going to be pretty close. Let's just talk about what they did last year, and then we'll wrap up from this. So last year, this is Javonte Williams' numbers. 17 games, 203 attempts, 903 rushing yards, 4.4 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns, 43 grabs, 53 targets. He was great through the air, 316 receiving yards, and he had 7 total touchdowns. He had 3 receiving. So 161 fantasy points, 9.5 in a standard setting. In a full point setting, 204 and 12.1 fantasy points per game. Here's Melvin Gordon's numbers, who is a good back. He's a good pass blocker. He's got a nose for the end zone. He's had 2 seasons with double-digit touchdowns. He's had at least 8 touchdowns in 6 straight seasons. He's a productive back. Remember his first year with the Chargers as a rookie? He had 0 touchdowns, and he bounced back with 10. He's had at least 8 touchdowns in every single season but 1. Last year, 203 attempts, the exact same amount of attempts as Javonte Williams. 918 rushing yards, 15 more rushing yards, so 5.4 yards per pop. He had more rushing touchdowns with 8. He had 28 receptions, 38 targets, and 213 receiving yards and just 2 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns. So that is where Williams had the edge on him, but he averaged 12.2 fantasy points. Williams averaged 12.1. I think we're going to see a lot of the same guys this season. I really do. The fact that they brought him back, they knew what they had in him. They were obviously satisfied with what they had in him. And I think you're seeing across the league a lot of teams going to just committees, like 2 or 3 different running backs. And this is a really good 1-2 punch, one of the better 1-2 punches in the league. So if you wanted to go for Fournette, second round, stockpile wide receivers, you can get a Miles Sanders, you can get a Melvin Gordon in around round 8, 100, outside the top 100 picks, guys that could be productive for you. Gordon was an RB2. a low-end RB2, just like Williams. But you got to spend that price on Williams. I just don't want to do it. I just can't do it. Dynasty Keeper League, different story. Redraft, I think there's a lot of value on Melvin Gordon, and we'll just leave it at that. Like I said, Javonte Williams, I think he's way more, I think he's got a higher ceiling, but I do believe what we saw last year is going to be very, very similar. Let's break and talk about the New York Jets, and then we have some MLB picks and props to round out Mean Streets. Keep her locked. Talk about one of the worst football teams in the NFL, right? And then we'll get to some MLB picks. The New York Jets, like I said off the top of the show, I feel like they have done a decent job at drafting over the past couple of seasons. You see there just long shots across the board to win the AFC East at 22-1, AFC overall at 85-1, and they got the Super Bowl at 150-1. And last year's record at 4-13. Let's switch over to some of their fantasy weapons here. You know, Zach Wilson going as quarterback 25, so he's not getting drafted in single quarterback leagues, and nor should he. I think he's interesting from maybe potentially a super flex standpoint. Maybe as like your third quarterback, as a guy who maybe could be a number two for you, right? I mean, they've done a decent job of surrounding him around some weapons again this season, but last year, only 13 games, he had a 55% completion rate, 6.1 yards per pass attempt, 9 touchdowns, 11 picks. He had 4 rushing touchdowns. He had a really nice, couple nice runs last year. He had 29 attempts at 185 yards. But from a fantasy standpoint, you know, he only topped 17 fantasy points twice last year, or 3 times rather. Week 1 against Carolina, he had 18 fantasy points, and then he had 21 fantasy points in a start against the Philadelphia Eagles, where he had 2 passing touchdowns, and he had a rushing touchdown in there, and he had 23 fantasy points against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he kind of beat up on a couple mediocre teams, but you got Breece Hall in there at RB 18, ADP 38. Michael Carter, right, showed us some really good things last year, especially as a pass catcher, but I think you got to pour one out for Michael Carter. It's going to be Breece Hall's backfield with Carter maybe sprinkled in, some third down reps in there. Elijah Moore, wide receiver 32. Garrett Wilson was one of my, I think honestly, he's my favorite wide receiver from this year's draft class. I really like Jamison Williams as well, but Garrett Wilson, it could have went to, I guess, a better landing spot from a redraft standpoint. You know, there's still like Moore is there and Davis is there, but I think this guy's an absolute stud. I think, you know, looking at the long-term future here of the Jets, there's reasons to be excited with like Hall and Moore and Wilson. Corey Davis is a pretty good wide receiver, but I won't be interested in him from a redraft standpoint. And then they bring in CJ Uzomah. Elijah Moore, to me, as where he's going there as wide receiver 32, I think there's decent value there. I definitely was something there between him and Zach Wilson. They didn't play a whole lot together last year. Wilson had suffered the injury, but down the stretch, Elijah Moore, pretty good. We'll bring it to a PPR standpoint to get some of these numbers in here. Listen to some of the games that he had. So from like week 7, from week 13, this guy was like a wide receiver too. He had 10 fantasy points against New England, and it was some of what he was doing was rushing, right? He had a rushing touchdown, and they were using him some end arounds, which they should. I mean, he's very explosive. So he had 6 targets, 1 catch, 13 yards, but he had the rushing touchdown to give him 10 fantasy points. The following week, he went 6 for 67, and he had 13 fantasy points against the Colts. He had 8 targets, 7 grabs, 84 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Against the Bills, he had 6 targets, 3 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown. Ended up with 13 fantasy points against Miami. He had 11 targets, 8 grabs, a touchdown, and he ended up with 29 fantasy points. He showed us his ceiling. He had a carry there for 15 rushing yards. Against the Texans, he had 4 grabs on 8 targets, 46 yards, 9.3 fantasy points, and he wrapped up in a big way against the Philadelphia Eagles before he suffered that injury. He had 6 catches, 12 targets, 77 yards, and a touchdown. So he was very productive down the stretch, and I'm interested in him. I think Garrett Wilson is a fine dynasty target. Corey Davis, Joshua checks in, says was a top 5 pick and led the team in targets before he got hurt, right? Yeah, he was, man. I had futures on him. This time last year, I was gushing over Corey Davis. I just thought he was in for a great year. He was going to get all the targets. I was buying the hype, and he was great. He was really good. You're right. At the start of the season, he was fantastic, and then he suffered that injury, and unfortunately, I lost all my futures. But his receiving yard prop was like 750. He was well on his way to surpassing that. I mean, easily, I thought, with the extra game in there as well. That's it, really. For me, I'm fine with Breece Hall. Let me give you a sneak peek of what Jeff Ratcliffe wrote about Breece Hall. Why not? He says, quote, "Is this the most optimal landing spot for Hall? No, but it's also isn't as bad as what some people may lead you to believe. Sure, the Jets have Michael Carter already in the house, but Hall clearly profiles as the most desirable early down runner, with Carter serving as the primary pass catcher. While that isn't a coveted 3-down role, it's a bit of a stretch to expect that kind of workload in today's NFL. In New York, Hall will get to play in a Shanahan-inspired run game under offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur on an improved offense and behind a solid offensive line. I do agree. And he says that bodes well for Hall's fantasy potential in his rookie season. Despite not landing in the perfect spot, Hall figures to see enough volume to be an RB2 out of the gate. I have him as RB17. I think he has upside to be like a top 15 running back. I think people may not want to grab him because he's a Jet. You're going to see that all the time. He's a Jet. He's linked to one of the worst offenses. No thanks. I think he's a lock and loaded RB2, and it's a reasonable price where he's going in drafts. He's the best wide receiver on the Jets, and Corey Davis, sure, 100%. If he's 100% healthy, he's the best wide receiver. I'm not going to argue that, but I think long-term, you should be excited about Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson, especially if you're a Jets fan. I know Cuss probably is. We'll break. One more segment here. I got some MLB props for you. Stay tuned. Welcome back in. Thanks for taking the time to hang out the entire show. If you're just here for some MLB picks, let's get after it. I'm going to lead with Shane Baz of the Tampa Bay Rays, and his strikeout prop is set at 5.5 here, and it is plus 105. He's racked up 15 strikeouts in 13 innings this season, and he's topped this number in each of his last 2 starts. He had 6 strikeouts in 4 2/3 in his last outing, which came against a very tough New York Yankees squad. He struck out 7 Orioles in 6 innings in the start before that, a team that struck out a lot against lefties, and that's what we have in this matchup here against the Baltimore Orioles. They rank inside the top 10 in strikeout percentage against southpaws this season at 23.2%. Baz has 33 strikeouts in 26 1/3 innings. He's got a solid 11.28 K per 9 for his career and a sparkling 14.2 swinging strike percentage. So I think this is a pretty good spot here against the Milwaukee Brewers. And a couple other more pitcher props here for you this evening. Again, all of it can be found over at FTN Bet Tracker. We have a couple strikeout props here for you. Sean Manaea over 5.5 strikeouts, Zach Wheeler over 6.5 strikeouts, and Robbie Ray over 6.5 strikeouts as well. Let's start with Wheeler. Wheeler's got the tough matchup against the Braves, but he's had at least 7 strikeouts in 9 of his last 10 starts. His last outing against Atlanta, he had a season-high 10 strikeouts in 6 2/3. The Braves have the high swinging strike percentage in all of baseball at 13.4%, and the second highest strikeout in baseball against right-handed pitching at 25.4%. Then we got Robbie Ray against the Orioles, as I just mentioned, a team that really struggles. I mean, they're playing really good ball lately. I mean, they're kind of hanging around the wild card race all of a sudden, but they still strike out a lot against lefties. 25.5% strikeout rate against southpaws, the second highest in the game. They also have the third highest swinging strike percentage. Robbie Ray's been much better at home than on the road, a 2.84 ERA, where opponents are only hitting 193 with a 256 WOBA. And then to round out here with Sean Manaea, he gets the Diamondbacks for the 3rd time this season, the 2nd time in a row. He's topped this number in each of his first 2 starts against Arizona this season. He's got a solid K per 9, and Arizona has a strikeout rate against lefties at 23.5%. So all of those pitchers over the number, and Shane Baz as well. We are out of here. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a good one. Cheers.